I'm holding right here what you could call a maniac's roadmap to murder. A detailed hand-drawn map that has just been sent to Crime Watch Daily by one of the most twisted and deranged serial killers in American criminal history. Dennis Rader, a monster who hid behind the mask of your average everyday guy next door as he strangled young girls, moms, and grandmothers in Wichita, Kansas, under the name of BTK. Meaning
to bind, to torture, and to kill.
Dennis Rader was able to keep killing because nobody in Wichita would have ever guessed he was a serial killer.
The helpful neighbor, the good father, the regular churchgoer, the president of his congregation, a reliable worker.
Who served the city in various jobs, including dog catcher and compliance officer, and was even a volunteer scoutmaster.
You could not have imagined somebody that was walking around on the streets, being a compliance officer, measuring people's grass, was a prolific serial killer in this community. Taking pictures of himself being strangled, pictures of himself in women's clothing that he had gotten from crime scenes.
The most erotic image he could imagine is the look of a person in utter terror.
Dennis Rader would claim the lives of 10 innocent residents of Wichita, most of them women whom he strangled with his bare hands or with their own clothing, including stockings and pantyhose. And these are actual photos Rader took of himself dressed as his victims, playing them in their death scenes to relive the erotic pleasure he got from murdering them.
So he can go back and look at them and still get some type of erotic buzz as a result of his own handiwork.
He wasn't the balding, paunchy guy who got arrested. He was a good-looking guy who was strong enough to overpower people and felt very confident of himself.
Which would come in handy when Rader began acting out his murderous double life.
Rader thought of himself in many different ways, but one of them was a James Bond type of spy. He liked the idea of living the double life, having this ordinary seeming existence, at the same time he's stalking people.
Catherine Ramsland knows Rader better than anyone, and the professor of forensic psychology and director of the master's program in criminal justice at DeSales University in Pennsylvania has made studying serial killers her life's work.
Dennis Rader was not the first serial killer I'd ever talked to. I certainly had studied hundreds of them in detail.
Publishing her findings in 58 books, including her latest, Confession of a Serial Killer. The untold story of Dennis Rader after talking to him in person at prison and on the phone for the past 5 years.
The signs were there. The signs were there. Someone could have picked him up.
I knew that there would be things that he hadn't talked about with anybody else. I knew I had to build toward that by having him trust me.
So Professor Ramsland could get inside Rader's sick mind.
He wanted to be Wichita's boogeyman, that he could show up anytime, anywhere, and you never knew where he was going to be next.
Controlling an entire city with fear.
What he wanted to be was Jack the Ripper.
Ever since he was a young teenager, getting turned on by those images of captive women in his collection of those old True Detective magazines.
Binding them and taking pictures and telling them they're going to die. That was seared into Rader's adolescent consciousness as the ultimate thing he wanted to see in his victims' faces.
4 members of this family are about to die in a house of horrors. And the psychosexual maniac known as BTK, as in bind, torture, kill, will be born, leaving his evil signature and a lifetime of heartache behind. Imagine returning home from school, walking into your house, and finding most of your family murdered. Your mother and father strangled, your little sister hanging from a pipe in the basement. Well, that's exactly what happened here to Danny, Carmen, and Charlie Otero.
I went through the kitchen and to the hallway when I saw my father's feet tied together.
She started yelling, calling my name and screaming hysterically.
Danny, 14 at the time, and Carmen, 12, are the first to arrive home.
So I ran over there and I saw that he had a belt around his neck. His eyes were open and rolled back.
They're in a slaughterhouse.
I could see my mother on the bed.
Mom's tied up too. I said, untie him.
I grabbed nail clippers to cut the rope around her neck.
I said, I'm gonna go try and get help. And I ran to the kitchen and I picked up the phone and it was dead.
Rader cut the phone line, so Danny goes to the basement to try another phone, which is also dead.
And I didn't realize it, but my sister was hanging behind me from a pipe.
Fortunately, none of the kids get to see that or little Joseph Jr. lying dead, wrapped and bound like a mummy on his bedroom floor.
That's probably something I would have never been able to put away.
Danny tries to shield older brother Charlie, 15, when he arrives home moments later.
I said, you don't want to go in there. Charlie pushed right past me, and I heard he started yelling.
It was like being in a horror movie. You could smell the fear. You could smell the death.
Charlie now wishes he'd listened to Danny.
I felt like instantly somebody had ripped my chest wide open and pulled my heart out.
He sees his parents lying bound and dead.
The first words out of my mouth are, "What have you done now?" to my dad. I tried to undo his knots and tried to undo my mom's stuff, and it wasn't coming undone.
Charlie realizes the killer may still be in the house.
I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a big butcher knife and yelled out, "Whoever's in this house, you're dead." And I started to go through the house.
But Rader has already fled, leaving 3 terrified children orphaned and traumatized for the rest of their lives.
How could God have let this happen?
I was just standing there with a blank look on my face. I was in shock.
I just kept thinking, why would anybody do this?
Or this. Recreate the hanging murder of Josephine Otero and photograph himself playing the role of his young victim.
His mind worked different than normal people's minds work. He wanted satisfaction, and the way he got it was to do this.
I just wanted him to feel the pain that he had caused my family. And so all I could think about was getting my hands on him.
Now, after all this time, Charlie, sister Carmen, and brother Danny have finally come to terms with the emotional trauma they suffered when they returned home from school to find the rest of their family murdered by Rader. And I was with them as they returned to this house of horrors to say one final farewell to their loved ones and a nightmare that has haunted them their whole lives.
You're okay with everything?
Yeah, it's just sadness there. That's not what we're all about. That's just sadness, and I'm okay with leaving it.
If it was up to me, this place would be flat. There might be a little memorial to my family in the middle of it, and that's about it.
But Danny couldn't hide his pain as he put a flower on the windowsill of the bedroom he shared with his slain little brother, Joseph Jr.
That was your rose of goodbye.
Goodbye.
You're at peace.
Very much so. I don't feel bad at all. I'm teary-eyed, but I don't feel bad at all. They're gone. They're in a better place than we were in.
But the monster who sent them to their graves, Dennis Rader, apparently remains unrepentant about his hideous crimes.
Does he feel any kind of deep remorse? I don't think so.
And now he's bringing the case back to life. Ten unsuspecting residents of Wichita, Kansas have already now fallen prey to Dennis Rader, the crazed serial killer who calls himself BTK. As in bind, torture, kill.
It's really demented.
Then the killing suddenly stopped, and the BTK case would go cold for the next 13 years until
Dennis Rader decided to announce his 30th anniversary.
Claiming responsibility under his alias of BTK for all of his 10 killings in a bizarre media blitz of local TV stations, newspapers, and the police.
He got these Barbie dolls, they were fashion dolls, I guess he called them, where he would make them look like the victims and he'd send them in cereal boxes because he's a serial killer.
Rader also sends his sketches, photographs, and mementos of his murders, along with his detailed writings about the killings to get cops scrambling.
So they had to follow all those leads.
But cops get the last laugh when Rader foolishly sends a newspaper a computer disk that they can trace to his church where he had downloaded it.
The excitement was palpable. The computer people, all the detectives, I was around then, they slipped this thing into the computer and up pops Dennis Rader.
Rader would be arrested near his home.
And then he folded like a cheap suit.
Eventually pleading guilty to 10 charges of first-degree murder.
Dennis Rader got 10 life sentences.
And now he's brought the case back to life. Asking author and forensic psychologist Katherine Ramsland to give us this map he drew just for Crime Watch Daily. I also have here Rader's hand-drawn key to the map explaining how to find a grisly so-called buried treasure of drawings, photos, and evidence of his maniacal thrill kills and perhaps murders that police aren't even aware of.
There were hidey holes that were never discovered by anybody, and where items still could be buried.
And this is a tape of a telephone interview from prison in which Rader gives Crime Watch Daily more clues to reading that map.
I drew a big circle around it, and there's a lot of other different things in that area.
He realized that there's still a lot of stuff out there that nobody has found. It certainly didn't end up in police custody.
Well, a lot of times when I get rid of stuff, I would bury it.
And he talks about his so-called hidey holes on the map.
Well, one of them was real elaborate. I built it underneath the house. I used a plastic bucket and formed a concrete thing around it so he couldn't find it.
Rader said many of the hidey holes are in abandoned barns and old sheds.
There's quite a few of those around Kansas.
Crime Watch Daily is forwarding the map and the key to it to the Wichita Police Department as we also continue to investigate the BTK killer's roadmap to murder ourselves.